From your experience traveling, how did that then benefit you when stepping into corporate world or into business? Welcome, everyone, to the main journey, a way for you to join me on a learning journey through life. My name is Samuel Main, and today we welcome Jem Fuller to the show. Jem has lived a colourful global life, from barefoot backpacker to corporate leader, fire dancer and traditional tattooist, kindergarten teacher to motorcycle courier, masseuse and reflexology to labourer and travel consultant. Now his time is as partner and father, coach, facilitator, and retreat leader. He is the award-winning author of the book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men, and can be seen delivering his TEDx talk on YouTube. You can find links to these in the attached show notes. Jem, wow, what an incredible life you have lived so far, with challenges that no one can prepare themselves for too. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, bright and early. I'd love it if you could give the audience an insight into your journey through your own words.
Yeah, wow, indeed. Well read, Samuel. That was awesome.
Tongue twister.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for having me on your show. Firstly, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, look, it's interesting. I was reflecting as you were reading out the intro. As sad as it would be for the handful of people who love me dearly, if it was to end tomorrow, I'd be happy, dude. Yeah, I wouldn't feel like I hadn't packed enough in.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel like I hadn't lived enough. And I guess I've kind of been conscious of that as well. My youngest brother, I'm the eldest of four kids, and our youngest brother died on his motorbike when he's 30. So obviously unexpected and very instant. And he lived a full life. In his 30 years, he packed more in than a lot of people do in a much longer lifetime. And he was really a shining example of that, the carpe diem saying, the seize life. And he really lived like that. And I think I've done a pretty good job of that too, hence having packed so much in. But, all of the different ways of earning money, from tattooist to kindergarten teacher and everything else that you mentioned, really just kind of happened accidentally because I was addicted to travel, and I just wanted to keep traveling around the world. And when I'd run out of money, I'd find another way to stop somewhere and make money.
Yeah.
Until the tattooing thing, it kind of emerged just organically. I never set out to do it. I was into being tattooed. And then I realized that with tattoo needles and attaching them onto a stick, essentially, or a chopstick with cotton, and dipping them into the ink, the tattoo ink, and then just, by hand, just dotting the tattoo, that I could travel with this equipment, and it didn't take up any room in my backpack at all. And so I started by tattooing myself, and then tattooing other travelers who were game enough to let this novice onto their skin. And then over time, it got to the point where I was good enough at it that I was trading. So someone would say, I'll give you a massage and you give me a tattoo, or, or whatever it was, or a didgeridoo or whatever. And then over the time, the tattoos were good enough that I could start charging money for it. And then I had this kind of cash income anywhere where I was traveling around the world. So that was pretty handy. But, the other things, like being a kindergarten teacher, I never thought I'd be a kindergarten teacher. I mean, I love kids, but there I ended up in Taiwan, working in a kindergarten in Taiwan, teaching English and everything else to these little 4 and 5-year-olds. And I loved it. I spent over a year teaching these cheeky little monkeys. So look, it all kind of just accidentally happened. And then in my early 30s, I'd fallen in love and got married, and we were still traveling, and then we wanted to have kids. So we came back to Australia to start a family. And that's when it dawned on me, oh, wow, I've got to find a way to support these kids, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any qualifications. I was in my early 30s. I'd been to drama school for a year, and that was the extent of university for me. And no trade or anything. And I'd really just been bumming around the world. And so I didn't know what to do. So I got a job with a travel company, international travel company, and had a pretty successful 8 years with them. And that's at the end of that, in the last few years of that, I was in a suit and tie and in that quote unquote corporate leader role, with 150 staff, and the division of the business that I'd bought into was turning over $100 million a year. So there was, all of the numbers on the spreadsheets and the P&L, and lots of inherent and relentless pressure to drive net profit growth. So to any of your listeners who are employed in a situation where really the screws are turned and the KPIs are all focused on growing net profit, I understand that pressure. I also ideologically disagree with it. I think a lot of the corporate world are focusing on the wrong thing, and that the profit should really only be an outcome of the proper focus, which is a more human-centric focus. Anyway, that's a whole other tangent I can get into. I coach leaders on that now, but yeah, so did that, and then worked myself to a convenient, and also at the time it didn't feel very convenient, but with the benefit of hindsight, I look back and I'm super glad it happened. But I had my version of a midlife crisis in my early 40s, and my wife and I had a couple of young kids, and we'd overextended ourselves in terms of how much money we'd borrowed to build our dream home and live the dream life. And, I was earning a lot of money and flying business class, but also self-medicating with way too much alcohol and pretending to be happy when I wasn't. So I had the midlife crisis, which was, like I said, with the benefit of hindsight, really a fortuitous thing. I look back at it now as my midlife awakening.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And I lost my career, had to sell our house that we'd just built because I was broke. The marriage had gone too far south, so we had to end the marriage. And I left that chapter to come into the chapter that I'm currently in now. This was about 9 years ago. Left that chapter with my two boys, thankfully, week on, week off. So we've always been 50-50 with the kids. We had no assets or money to fight over because we were broke. So I took the 100 grand of debt, and I gave my ex-wife all of the belongings. I said, you take all the contents. And I had a guitar, a surfboard, 2 kids, and 100 grand of debt 9 years ago.
Wow.
And so the last 9 years has been really essentially, on an existential level, it's been a reparation of my relationship with self. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to unpack that with you later if anyone's interested. So really just coming back to cultivating a much more beautiful relationship with myself, which then plays out into my relationship with life and anyone, that's involved in that. So becoming a much better father, attracting an amazing human into my intimate life. And my partner and I are very lucky to experience a superbly conscious relationship, which is quite something. And my work. So I threw myself into the deep end of starting a coaching practice. I was always fascinated in human behavior. So I went and studied human behavior and profiling, NLP, things like this. Started my coaching practice 9 years ago, and I love what I do. So it hasn't felt like work. It's really felt like a passion and a vocation. And thankfully I've been able to turn that into a really successful business. I earn wonderful money, and I get to live in a beautiful part of the world and spend a lot of time with those that I love, and travel around the world. So, we run retreats in the Himalaya in India, and in 5-star resorts in Bali, and in the deserts of remote Northern Australia. I get to have time to write books, and create online courses for people. And life's pretty good, man.
It's amazing, man, to hear the story. For me, like, what comes to mind is like, man, I just want to sit around the fire with you and just talk just all the time. And I know that this is a variation of that, but that's I love to hear the stories. And being fortunate enough that I've traveled quite a bit for my age, I know that there's those ups and those downs. So I know that you've seen and experienced those challenges. Um,
Mm,
what's super interesting when came to mind for me was how resourceful you were and how quickly you adapted to situations that you were in and developed
mm,
these skills to a certain extent. And I'm really
mm.
intrigued from your experience traveling, how did that then benefit you when stepping into corporate world or into business?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have thought about this. Something that I'm quite good at inside organizations is helping departments communicate interdepartmentally, cross-culturally. You know, that within any organization, there's a certain culture for the sales department,
Hmm.
which is different to the culture of the finance department or of the operations department, because they have different local objectives. And so ideally in an organization, the overarching objective, the higher purpose, the mission, is the glue that binds all of the departments together. However, more often than not, if an organization does have a mission statement, it's a statement sitting on a wall somewhere getting dusty and
Yeah.
everyone just thinks it's a crock, you know. But ideally that is the glue that binds the departments together. But because I've spent so much time immersed in very different cultures to my own,
Mhm.
and having to learn how to communicate with people who not only don't speak the same language, but have a whole different paradigm on reality of life, spiritually, religiously, culturally, taste budly, everything. Socially, the social structures and everything is so different. And I used to love that. That drove me a lot. When I was traveling, I was passionate about exploring places that were very different to where I grew up. I just had this curiosity, I guess. And so what that taught me, to answer your question, what that taught me is how to find the human common pieces, the stuff that we all share, regardless of where you grew up, how to bring those into the communication so that we've got something in common. So then we can explore the diversity, then we can explore the difference, you know, which I think is ultimately important. You know, if we have a team of creatives who've all had the same upbringing, pretty much, they've all come from the same background, they've all got the same kind of social, religious, spiritual ideas, the bandwidth of creative solution possibility is very narrow, right? So diversity is ultimately important if we're going to solve the biggest problems, whether that be just in your organization or globally. However, people find it hard to harness the power of that diversity because they can't get over the difference. They don't know how to communicate. So I figured out organically how to communicate with people very differently to me. And then I can translate that now into an organization and help the head of the executive of the sales department and the executive of the finance department actually sit down and break bread together, so to speak,
Yeah.
and get along and realize that they both actually want the same outcome. So let's talk about how do we work together to get that.
Love that. So interesting. I really like that point where you mentioned about having a set culture for the entire company, but then each department may have almost variations of that, which is super interesting. I'm sure you're the same. When I've previously traveled, you get so comfortable in almost any situation because you've
Mm,
experienced quite a lot. You're like, yeah, just drop me off in this random country and I'll figure it out. That freaks out a lot of my family and close friends because they just, they haven't experienced as much travel. It's a very strange scenario. So to
yeah.
hear you talk about that and the importance of that communication is huge. Is huge.
Yeah. So you'd get it as well, right? You understand. I'm guessing that you'd be quite resourceful and resilient if you were dropped into a situation that you'd never been in before.
Yeah.
And because you've traveled, I think before we started recording, you've traveled to 35 countries or more. So yeah, so you understand it. It's funny, Samuel, my 18-year-old who has just finished high school and next year he's taking off to travel.
Mhm.
And he said to me, Dad, how will I know, when I get to a foreign city, how will I know where to go and what to do? And I said, are you kidding me? You've got an iPhone. You know, you've got everything you need. I
Every-
mean, you could literally just ask that thing to guide you.
Yeah,
It'll find your hotel for you.
everything.
It'll tell you how to get there. It'll tell you how much. It'll tell you what to watch out for. It'll give you the maps. It'll get like, seriously. Um, back back in the day, I'm sounding like an old man. I'm 51. But when I was traveling around Asia, pretty much barefoot and dreadlocked, um, there was the communication was to my family back home, to my mum and dad. I'd say, look, I think I'm going to be in Delhi in a month. So if you want to write me any letters, you send them to the GPO, to the poste restante, So they would hand write a
Right.
letter. And I would either end up in Delhi or I wouldn't. And if I didn't, there's letters sitting for me in GPO boxes around the world, I'm sure. But I'd get to Delhi and you'd go into the big main general post office in the center of a foreign city with your passport. You go up to the front desk and give them your passport, and they'd go to pigeonholes and they'd look up in the pigeonhole under your surname and they'd find any snail mail that was there for you,
Amazing.
Yeah, different times.
Different times. I found, in a way, because I got too comfortable, I was then in some really difficult situation because I just arrived at a country, hadn't planned
Yeah.
where I was going to stay, hadn't planned
Yeah.
how I was going to get away from the airport, and you're just like, yeah, I'll figure it out. It's fine. And then you get there, and
Yeah.
there's no taxis. You can't find anywhere
Yeah.
to stay. Like, okay, wait a minute, this may be a problem. From
Yeah.
from reading your book, from watching the TEDx talk, it became very apparent to me you like to learn a language, or you actually like to learn some phrases in languages when you
Yeah.
visit countries. And I find that super, super interesting. And I'm assuming that's so you can communicate even better with those people that you are now going to be, alongside. Can you expand on this a little bit and your thought process behind it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wish I could say I was multilingual. I'm not. I'm multi-phrasal. Oh, I know a handful of phrases in a lot of different languages. And it's interesting, as you were speaking then, I think the reason that I haven't made the effort to study a language and understand and be able to speak it fluently, to be able to converse fluently, is because I'm probably a bit lazy or didn't have enough drive to understand the whole language. But the reason that it was very important for me to learn a few phrases was a sign of respect.
Mhm.
And a few phrases in the local language gets you so far. People love it. They warm to you. If they see that you've made the effort just to say, hello, how are you? It's a nice day. Where's the bank? Where's the restaurant? Just some simple phrases. If you go into a foreign culture and you initiate conversation in their language, and even if your accent's terrible, which they find endearing, it just goes a long way, man. Like when I first walked into Pakistan back in the 90s, before walking across the border from India into Pakistan, I went to a tailor and I had traditional shalwar kameez made, so the traditional Pakistani long shirt and pants that they wear. I had a beard. I learned how to say assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam. I learned a handful of Urdu words. Today is a beautiful day. Thank you. Shukriya. Just some simple stuff. And then I went into Pakistan. And I saw a Pakistan that a lot of people don't see. And I understand it's different for males and females. I get that.
Yep.
But I know males that have gone in through Pakistan and not had the experience that I had, because they went in there wearing a t-shirt and shorts and saying, "G'day, mate, how you going?"
Yep.
They just had a different experience. So for me, I used to be, when I was younger, I used to be quite passionate about differentiating that I'm not a tourist. I would hate being seen as a tourist. So I used to really try and show up like a traveler. And for many years, when that's all I did, I didn't have a career. I wasn't trying to, do the rat race thing. I thought, well, how am I going to identify? Who am I then? If I'm not a builder or an accountant or a sales guy, who am I? I thought, I'm a traveler, And I used to think of that as a noble pursuit, because I was the one who was going into foreign cultures and understanding them, and then taking those stories to another culture or back home, and, this global humanity, that I was a part of that. And so for me, it was important to go into any country that I was going into respectfully, and to go in to learn, not to go in to tell them how to do anything at all. Really to go in and experience their food, experience their culture, experience their routines, their rhythms, their energy, and not always agree with it. It wasn't like I was going and saying, oh, you're doing everything the most perfect way. No. We're humans. And Samuel, side note, can we swear on your podcast?
Absolutely. Carry on.
Great. I don't want to upset anyone.
Yeah, you're absolutely fine.
Yeah. So we're humans, and wherever you go, we fuck shit up. We're humans. That's part of being what we are, And so you go into different cultures, and I would just observe and go, wow, that's cool. And then I'd observe other stuff and go, wow, that's fucked, man. Internally, wouldn't tell them.
You see some stuff.
You see some stuff, you see some stuff, and you get to really connect with people on a much deeper level. And that, I was thinking then about a story. I share this story in my book, so I'll give you the very short version now. But in Thailand, my wife and I had been living on a small tourist island in Thailand, and I'd set up there tattooing. That's how I was earning money there. And so to be allowed to tattoo on this island, I'd got in and made friends with the gang, the local gang, and these boys, they ran a Rasta bar up in a tree house. They built this cool tree house, and it was the Rasta bar, and it was the cool place. All the hippies and travelers and backpackers would go and hang out there. And all the tourists would just see this kind of friendly version of these local Thai boys. I tattooed them for free, tattooed them to get in with them, got in with them, and I saw the real side of them. And the real side of them was that you don't mess with these boys. They had guns. In Thailand, if you screw up, they'll kill you. There's a whole side to Thailand that's not the touristy nice side. Yep. But I was mates with them. I got in really closely with them, and we were there for a couple of months. And there was some tension brewing between some of the tourists and some of these younger Thai boys. And these younger Thai boys were using amphetamines and drinking booze, and that wasn't good for them. And one night it erupted, man. It erupted into a terrible fight on the beach. The Thai boys started it. But it erupted into a brawl. And I'm talking about 100 people. So probably about 20 local Thai boys and about 80 tourists. And it was just this brawl on the beach, and it was horrible. People were getting hurt and everything. And I'm a pacifist. I'm completely anti-violence. Anyway, I knew who the linchpin was of this whole situation, and I just ran through the crowd and picked him up over my shoulders and ran him around the back of a hut out of harm's way and pinned him to the ground. Local boy who I'd tattooed. I tried to tattoo him. He squealed like someone who was being. Anyway, so I took him around the back, and I knew that he was the linchpin.
Yep.
So I removed him, and my wife came with me, and she tried to calm him down, and I just held him in a bear hug restraint. And then, sure enough, the fight subdued, and people went off licking their wounds to go back to their huts. And one of the more aggressive older Thai guys was furious with me because I'd restrained his younger brother, and he came face to face with me, and he was foaming at the mouth. He wanted to kick the shit out of me, and he could have. He was like, I'm not a fighter, and he could have. But I looked him in the eyes with the 2 months of connection that we'd had, and I tattooed this man. He spent 4 or 5 hours under my needles, and I looked him in the eyes, coming from a place of love, and he let me pass. He didn't beat me up. This is while I was physically holding his younger brother, and I took his younger brother home, back up to the treehouse, and calmed the whole situation down. Anyway, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't had the relationship with these guys that I'd had, if I hadn't gone in there respectfully, and formed proper bonds with them. So, yeah.
Amazing. I read that section in your book. I believe the guy was called Lucky.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate enough, I lived in Thailand for just under a year. I was coaching out there.
Uh-huh.
And I can, in a way, it brought these images to my head. I could picture like that whole scenario. So as I was reading through it and hearing you talk through it, then I'm like, I can see it. I can see that happening. And
Yeah.
I actually want to share as well. It actually triggered me a little bit earlier
Mm.
in my own journey where I didn't make that intention to learn the language in all the places that I went. And it triggered me because I'm like, now that I've learned that, I was like, I can see how that would change the experience. And that's something that I would like to carry on moving forward. The new places that I go, I'm like, yeah, I want to make a conscious effort to be able to communicate better with those the people, especially when I'm essentially entering their home.
Yeah.
So yeah, that triggered me because I was like, I didn't do that. So I'm like, no, that's something that I get to learn
Yeah.
from, which is super
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah. Great.
obviously you've explored, you've traveled. There's so many stories I'd love to delve into. Um, how is this now then? How is that travel and learning the different cultures transferred into what you do now, and even with writing the book as well?
Yeah. I One of the ways that it translates is the ability to, and it's similar to what I was talking to about before, the difference in culture within departments in organizations,
Yeah,
but also there's another difference and there's another bridge, that I can form over a divide, and that is from philosophical, ideological concepts into practical applications.
nice.
So, there's a lot of books that we read and it talks about, you might read an Eckhart Tolle book, The Power of Now, or you might read a book about how to have some kind of lofty philosophical or spiritual conceptual understanding of life, and this will give you a great life, or this will make you a better leader, or whatever. But people are like, yeah, but what do I actually do?
Yeah,
What do I actually do when I wake up in the morning? What do I actually do? What habits should I form to make me a better leader? And I've developed the ability to be able to communicate across that bridge of difference from concept to practicality. And that's really useful. So my clients are really grateful for that. And in fact, when I explain something in an easy to understand way, people say to me, "Oh my God, that's so simple. I feel like I already knew that. I feel like I knew that. Doesn't sound like you're speaking rocket science. You just give something to me very plainly, very practically and applicably. And now I just go and do it. And then I provide, as a coach, I provide them with accountability, because I think that support and ongoing accountability is massively important
yeah,
part of coaching anyone to do anything. Even as a sports coach, the football coach doesn't just show up on training night and say, you need to do this better, and then disappear. The football coach is there going, hey, come on, remember. Yeah, it's interesting. I was chatting with a new mate of mine who's actually now representing me in the States as my literary and speaker agent. I'll drop his name here, Scott Miller. And so Scott Miller has worked and still does to a certain degree with Franklin Covey, who are a big global leadership organization. Anyway, I flew over to LA the other day to meet Scott and his business partner, to sort out the nuts and bolts of them representing me in the States. And we were having a conversation. I can't remember how it came up, because on his podcast, he's interviewed every famous author you can think of. And Deepak Chopra came up. We were talking about Deepak. And he said, "What is Dharma?" And I said, "The purpose to your work, the meaning behind your work." And he went, "Oh, I get it." He goes, "You just explained to me in 5 seconds what Deepak tried to explain to me for 10 minutes.
Amazing.
And that's what I'm talking about. It's talking about taking these big wordy ideas and concepts and just going, hang on, let's just break it down.
Yep.
It's the meaning you put behind your work.
It's
It's that simple, right? So
love it.
yeah, anyway, and so that's a long answer to your question about how does it, what I've learned in terms of communicating across culture, how does that translate into the work that I do? And when I stand up to do a keynote in front of a room full of accountants or mortgage brokers, or risk assessors in a bank, and they're in their suits and ties, and they see me stand up and I've got a lot of tattoos and stretched ears, and they'll have their prejudgment of me when they first see me. And then they hear me speak in plain terms, but also in ways that they understand, wow, he's got some corporate sensibility. He understands, where we're coming from culturally, from the business side of things. But he can also stand up there as a tattooed traveler who was barefoot and dreadlocked around the world and make sense to us. So it also helps people dispel their own judgment and myth of, judging a book by its cover and then going, oh, actually, hang on, this guy's making a lot of sense to me. So that, again, also is this bridge across some divides of difference,
I relate to that so much.
Yeah.
I actually watched the when you was a guest on Scott Miller's podcast.
Right.
I thought you were incredible on it, to give you some credit. I genuinely thought it was such an incredible episode. So I will also, I'll link that down below, and of course the TEDx talk and the extras too. Is there a common framework or go-to that you use to help these leaders improve, either just in their role or even specifically for their communication?
Yeah. Yes, there's a specific framework, a model that I've created, which I can talk to. But if on a more macro level, in terms of the order of things, I believe that to improve your ability to communicate with anyone else, you first need to improve your ability to communicate with yourself.
Yeah.
And I can explain my thinking behind that. And then also more broadly, to improve your relationship with life. That entails every aspect: the relationship with your partner, your children, your team, your community, your relationship with nature, with animals, with anything, your relationship with life. To improve that, it's got to start with you. You need to improve your relationship with yourself. And the reasons for this is that your whole experience of whatever objective reality is, so the reality that you are a part of, your environment, your experience of that, your version of this reality, this objective reality, all takes place in your mind. You can only perceive everything in your mind. So all of the bits of information that are available to us that tell us that there is actually an environment around us, that tell us that there's a table here in front of me and that there's a laptop, that tell me that I'm breathing, and also internally what my body temperature is and all the stuff. All of that information comes to us in bits, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And we collate those bits of information and we represent them as this visual auditory hallucination in our mind. So if your whole experience of life, of reality, is in your mind, then how can the quality of your mind not matter? The quality of your mind matters. And the quality of your mind has a lot to do with your relationship with self, because it's all reflective. It's all trying to make sense of everything from my point of view. This idea that I exist somewhere inside my head and I'm the subject in the middle of this big play and I'm in the middle of it all. This illusion of duality is how we comprehend life, right? And our relationship with self is our relationship with the past. One of my teenage boys, when kids say things, really wise things, and they don't even fully understand how wise they're being. And my older boy, we love having deep philosophical conversations.
All about it.
He said to me one day, he goes, "Dad, if we had no memory, we would have no sense of self. We would not even know who we are." And I'm like, spot on. Your whole idea of me, of existence, of ego, of identity is all to do with your relationship with the past. And the more you hang on to, the less resolved you are with the things that have occurred and your stories around it. The less resolved you are, the more stuff you're hanging on to, the more shit you've got in this big bag of of hang-ups that we carry around with us, right? The thicker your lenses are, the lenses of interpretation, the thicker they are, the more convoluted and the more smoky they are between you and the outside world. So, for example, I can only perceive you, Samuel, through my lenses. You know, when I see you, hear you, if I was in the same room as you, when I can smell you, right? When I perceive you, all the data that comes from you to my understanding of who Samuel is goes through my lenses, it goes through my beliefs, it goes through my backgrounds, through my hang-ups, through my stuff. So my version of you is not the real you. It's Jem's version of you, which is different to others people. So the point I'm getting to is that the less resolved you are with your past, i.e. with yourself, the thicker the lenses between you and the outside world, the less clearly you see the outside world, the less clearly you see others, the less able you are to communicate clearly and truly understand other people. So the work has to start with you. It has to start with a process of self-okayness, radical self-acceptance, ironing out the creases from the past, you know, coming to a place of clarity in here. Because when you have the clarity of mind, the clarity of self, then you can see others more clearly. Then you can connect more clearly. Your rapport, your compassion, your empathy is much more clear. Then you start to become a leader that is really effective with people, because that's what a leader is. A leader is about people. It's all about people. Sure, you have strategy and you have design and you have macro plans for the future and, you know, yada, yada. That's fine. But all of the strategic planning in the world means nothing if you can't engage with humans and get them to be their best selves and let's go do this together, right? So it's really that human element that's the most important. If you haven't done the work on yourself, you're very limited in your ability to be able to connect and lead and inspire and motivate and all those things. So yes, I think it starts with self. Having said that, sorry, you've got me on a tangent. Having said that, if you are already in a leadership position, then obviously you can't just drop the tools and go, I'll be back, I'm going on a sabbatical, I'll be back in 6 months, I'm going to go and work on myself. So it needs to be concurrent, but we're clever. We're quite clever species. You can be doing the self-work and you can be still leading a team and, you know, so you can be improving as you go. So that's the overarching kind of macro where we should start. The process I think that you were alluding to, which is in my book as well, I'm happy to talk to if you want to.
No, I'm going to change because I've got so many more questions.
Right.
I love it.
Good.
I love it.
Good.
I loved when you mentioned about working with humans, and I believe it's Joey Coleman that talks about it's never business to business or business to consumer. It's always human to human, and that rings true for me. And especially my business is focused on the operations and fulfillment aspect of a business and coaching. It's working with humans, so I relate to that an awful lot. You mentioned about improving that relationship with yourself, so I'm intrigued. When did your journey take that turn to focusing on the relationship with yourself? Was that really early on before the travel? Was this during some of the challenges that you faced? I'm just intrigued, you know, has that been a recent thing? Where does that fit into your timeline?
I've always been introspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, that came in different ways through my life. When I was 20, I got into the National Institute of Dramatic Art here in Australia, NIDA. It's the big drama school. It's like RADA in London, but it's NIDA here in Australia. And studying acting, studying drama requires a lot of, you know, self-analysis. However, I was 20 and you know, and I thought I knew everything. So that was a version of it. And then traveling around the world, in particular, there was a year where I traveled on my own on the Indian subcontinent, just over a year on the Indian subcontinent. So a lot of time in India and Pakistan, China, Tibet, Bangladesh, like this. And I initially, at the start of that year, I was coming through an identity crisis. I was in my late 20s, and I had hit a really low point in London, broken heart, drug abuse, very, very broken self-esteem, not quite a low point.
Yeah.
And then what ensued after that was a year of deep self-reflection and intentional traveling on my own. So when people would say, oh, let's hook up and travel together, I would politely say, I'm traveling on my own. I mean, you're welcome to get on the same train as me, but I just want you to know that I'm traveling on my own. And so that was an intense period of self-reflection and quite an enlightening year. That was wonderful. But then, we have these moments of experiencing some sense of, and I use this word with trepidation because it's got so many connotations, but enlightenment.
Yeah.
Right. Some sense of being a part of something much bigger. So I had a sense of that. This was in my late 20s. And then through my marriage and getting into the corporate world and everything, I lost that. I got lost again. And then so really the time when I rolled my sleeves up and went to work on myself, and not just, right, I'm going to do 6 months of work on myself. No, creating a way of living that I still live today with daily practices that I still have, that have become habitual for me today. That started when I was 41, 42, 43. That was the midlife awakening bit.
Yeah.
And that looks like today, my daily routine, which I've been developing over the last decade, in the morning involves 20 to 30 minutes of meditation. It involves daily affirmations. It involves lots of mindful, integrated mindfulness. So every time I brush my teeth, I'm meditating. It involves lots of pausing throughout the day. So I've created a habit of pausing. So I'll be in between tasks and I'll pause. So for example, this morning before opening my laptop to come and find you, pause, breathe, and continue. I've created a habit of regularly eyeballing myself in the mirror and saying, mate, I love you. You're a good bloke. Keep going. Self-talk like that, which if you had told me that 15 years ago, I would have said, what? That's crazy. You're a crazy dude looking at yourself in the mirror. So maybe I'm a crazy dude. I don't know, but my relationship with self is certainly a lot better than it's ever been before. Yeah.
So incredible. Again, just to go through that journey. I speak a lot about people having a trigger moment, and they remember essentially one moment in time that did change their trajectory or acts as that awakening, as that enlightenment. It's really interesting to hear for you. It seems like there's been these ups and downs of that enlightenment where you've explored it a lot and then it's kind of been hidden away. Then you've explored it even more. And then it's also refreshing to hear the healthy place that you're at right now. And my next question was going to be, how does someone improve the relationship with themselves? But having just heard you go through some of the practices you're already doing, I'm assuming those would be that answer. But if I slightly change it to be, what would be the first step for someone in changing and improving the relationship with themselves?
Yeah, lovely question. I think there's something to be said for, well, two things need to happen. Through the human experience of the limbic system, through this emotional self situation, there has to be something that is, I believe, for any real massive change to occur, there has to be something that is leverage enough for you to want to do some work, to want to create some different habits, to want to live in a different way. There has to be something, really strong enough for that. Mm-hmm. If you're just kind of cruising through life and it's all right, but it's pretty okay, then I don't know whether you're going to have the emotion, which is the motion behind action, the need, the desire to do things differently. For me, that leverage was that, losing my marriage, losing my career, losing my house, and being really unhappy with myself, and to be even more vulnerable with your audience. I know you've got a lot of males in your audience. I had got to the point of and I didn't even realize this was coming from a self-loathing or a thinking that I wasn't good enough. But I developed through my marriage sexual anxiety over the years that got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I couldn't even function.
Yeah.
I would have panic attacks. And that was the most horrible, shameful, embarrassing, gut-wrenching experience to live as a male, because you look to the outside world and you see all these other men and you think you're the only one with that problem, and you can't even be the man for your woman in the bedroom, so you feel like a failure. I felt completely emasculated, and I was so embarrassed, Samuel. I didn't tell anyone, and this went on for years, man. And I kept this secret torture to myself, and it was horrible. But there was a glimmer of hope. I couldn't completely give up on myself. I thought there must be a way to figure this out. So that was the lowest of the low for me. It's part of the reason our marriage ended, because we couldn't figure it out in that marriage. Yep. And so I really had got to a point where my experience of life was so terrible that I would do anything to make it better. Luckily for me, suicide was never an option. I never properly contemplated it. I mean, sure, I thought about it, but I never actually thought I would ever do it. Yeah. I never thought about planning it or anything. And I know a lot of people do. So thankfully that wasn't an option for me. The only option was to try and make things better, and I just didn't know how. But so that was the emotional leverage for me. That's where I got to. The other part of the equation, I think, that's important is that from the neocortex point of view, from the rational point of view, I think we need to understand with reason the reality of the situation. So my irrational side had come up with the idea that I'm not good enough. I don't deserve happiness. I don't deserve success. I don't deserve to be a wonderful man in the bedroom. I don't deserve that stuff. That was my irrational thinking. So then with my rational thinking, I went, hang on a second, let's have a look at this. Let's put this out and let's come back to reality and see what's actually going on here. So Jem, are you good enough to be you? Right? Because that's who you should be, because you're not anyone else. Who should you be? Well, you should be yourself, apparently, because that's who you are. You're not that person. You shouldn't be more like him. And you shouldn't be more like him. You should actually just be you. And are you enough to be you? Well, let's ask reality. I don't know. If we took a snapshot in time right now and looked at it, apparently I am exactly who I'm supposed to be right now. Why? Because here I am. Right? So then I went to work on this problem using rationality, reason, reality, and going, well, apparently I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be, because here I am. And I can't argue with reality, because reality will win 100% of the time, right? So then you come up with the reason and you go, well, apparently I am enough, but I've still got this psychological, emotional racket going on that I'm not. So I've got this neural wiring that says I'm not enough, but I can use my rational realism to go, actually, I am enough, because here I am, right? Okay, so I know that rationally I'm enough. Now what can I do to change the wiring? So this is when you roll up your sleeves and go, okay. And I read a lot of books, and I, started to explore, what we've found through neuroscience in terms of plasticity and how the, neurons wire together, et cetera. What can we do to change that? Understanding dopamine levels and when does it work for us to use the plasticity of our mind and start to form new beliefs. And that's what I did. And it was pretty boring. It was, daily affirmations. It was daily meditations. It was daily, treating myself like I deserve to be treated, exercising, eating better, sleeping better, all of these things combined, knowing that it would take time. My first affirmation, which was, I am enough, just the way I am, I didn't even believe it. For the first 6 to 12 months, I didn't believe it. And I was saying it out loud every day, a lot. And I'd also found out through the imaging of the brain and the understanding of the neurochemicals that when dopamine levels rise, the formation of new neural sequences happens much quicker, right? We learn more when we're in that excited state.
Interesting.
So when my dopamine levels were higher, so for example, I enjoy surfing. So if I'd just caught a wave and I'd come off the back of the wave and the adrenaline was up and the dopamine was up, I'd be doing my affirmation out loud more because I'd read that it would wire together faster like that. So, you know, I just went to work, and after about a year, I started to believe it. I started to believe my own hype. So I was consciously brainwashing myself. And now, all these years down the track, I look back and I go, I can't believe that I used to think I wasn't good enough. Like that doesn't even make sense to me now, you know, because now I'm like, yeah, of course I'm enough. And when we change our internal world, our relationship with the outside world changes, right? You know this, you're a coach. And so my relationship with life changed and everything changed. You know, then now I do this wonderful work and I've got a wonderful woman and I've got blah, 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 all the good stuff. So there's the story with that.
Amazing. First of all, I want to express my gratitude for you sharing, because it's not easy topics. It's topics that are not talked about enough. And there'll be someone, no doubt, listening to this, that's probably just changed their complete perspective. I also think that it's very inspiring to hear, in the nicest way, how low things got for you, and then to see where you are now. That shows that power of that hope. You know, so someone who could be listening right now, maybe in that absolute terrible place, but Jem is here right now, you know, showing up for this podcast, has done some absolutely incredible things. And that stems from, you know, those low points. So again, thank you for sharing. I think it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. You mentioned about ultimately, you know, you have what you get to work on now. I'd love for you just to share a little bit more about actually what you're working on in this current moment. You mentioned you got the coaching practice. I'm going to assume there might be another book in the background. I don't know if you can talk about it or not. Don't feel pressured. But what are you currently focusing on at the moment?
I love variety and I have a very creative mind. So I'm happy when I've got several things to focus on. And so my bread and butter work, which I still enjoy and I'll keep doing it as long as I love doing it, is coaching leaders one-to-one and facilitating workshops for teams. So that bread and butter stuff, I've got lots of wonderful stuff going on in that. A lot of my work, excuse me, a lot of my work is, there's government departments and a couple of large not-for-profit organizations, which is great because that's bread and butter. But a lot of my one-to-one work is with people in the health sector. And a lot of allied health. So business owners who own health practices, physiotherapists, osteos, podiatrists, chiropractic, that kind of thing. And I love working in the health sector because generally speaking, they're good people, you know, who are wanting to just help others. And I love doing good work with good people. So that's that project. Yes, there are more books. And so The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men is the book that's been published. And Scott over in the States is going to be out there trying to get me a publishing deal for that book and the series of books that follows. So in my mind already, I haven't written them yet, but I've got them all in my mind. There's The Art of Conscious Communication for leaders, for teams, for parents, for partners, for children. For women, my partner is going to help me write the book for women. So there's a whole series of conscious communication books there. And then also there's a book over here, which I've started writing. The working title is Simplicity: Using the 5 Foundations to Create Your Best Life. So it's unashamedly a self-help book.
Yeah.
And what I will bring to this book is taking these lofty, ideas like Dharma and then turning them into practical applications. Wake up in the morning, do this. So that's the books that I'm writing. There's online courses So I have an online course sitting there already, which is in resilience. And this came about through COVID. I'd actually written, designed, and built the course before COVID came. And I had a launch here in Australia of the course. And the very next month, COVID happened. So this course then became much more relevant than it would have been otherwise, and has helped a lot of people through the last couple of years. It's now been endorsed by a government body here in Australia. It's had critical acclaim from a very well-renowned frontline psychologist. So there's that online course. There's other online courses that I'm building with partners. So there's a platform here in Australia, and we're building a course on conscious relating. My partner and I'll get to the retreats in a sec, but my partner and I have been running relationship retreats for years. So we're building an online course for relationships. And just last night, I was in a meeting with a woman in London. There's a new platform coming. They've built it already. It's about to be launched. And it's a platform where content creators can put hacks on there. So last night I built the 3 hacks to my book. So you get a snapshot of the content and an understanding of it. It's kind of like Blinkist. Have you ever heard of Blinkist?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like Blinkist, but for other stuff as well. So I've been invited on as one of the primary creators on that app. So I get to do that as well. And then there's the retreats. So the retreats is the Himalayan retreat, the Bali retreat, Australia. And we run retreats for leaders, for people who just want to do self-development, and for relationships, for conscious relating. So does that sound busy enough? I don't know.
Amazing. I love it. I love to see the multiple passions. I have a slight relation to that too in a lot of things I'm developing. It's so cool to hear following these different passions. Jem, where would be the actual best place for someone to go to connect with you or to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to follow me and just get little bite-sized pieces of content that I shared, Instagram. If you want to find out more about me, jemfuller.com. Yep. And I'm Jem Fuller on every different thing. So JEMFULLER. If you type that into YouTube, you'll see my TEDx talk. I'd love it if you could watch my TEDx talk and share it. That would really be helpful to me if you want to help me. Insta, Facebook, LinkedIn, all Jem Fuller. And on my website, you can see a whole bunch of stuff on there. Anything you want to know about me and the work that I do is on the website, jemfuller.com. And you can even, I'm still super accessible, man. If you go onto my website and fill out the contact form, or email me, jem@jemfuller.com. Email me. I'm super accessible. I will reply. I'm not busy enough to the point where I have to ignore people yet. Unless you're stalking me with low level stuff. But if you come to me and you want to talk about cool stuff, I'm here. I'm right here. And I'll share a link with people, and you can book some time into my calendar and we'll have a chat and get to know each other.
Brilliant. Absolutely love it. Jem, I have a final question for you. And this is a question that I ask every single guest that comes on the show. And that question is, what advice would your future self give you in this current moment?
You're exactly where you're supposed to be. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. Oh, and in parenthesis, you made it.
Amazing. Simple, powerful, to the point. Absolutely love it. Jem, I just want to express my gratitude for you getting up super early, funneling down the coffee and joining me this morning, sharing so much of your journey, being vulnerable, sharing so much value, there's so many takeaways from this call, and to see what you're building, what you're creating, and how that's going to positively impact others is inspiring. So I really appreciate you sharing your morning with me. And yeah, I'd love to do this again sometime.
Samuel, it's been a really, really wonderful way to start my day. And there's going to be a spring in my step now. And everyone who gets a piece of me today will get a good piece. So thank you for kicking it off really well.
Love it. Appreciate you.
All right, mate.
My name is Samuel Main, and I truly hope that you've got value from today's video. If you have, please do hit like and subscribe down below, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow.